morning. I'm the Reverend Denise Gouch. My pronouns are she, her, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to worship with the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation, we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We are a welcoming congregation, and we deepen our relationships as we serve our congregation's mission to create community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world, guided by reason and compassion. I'd like to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. If you have questions about our congregation, please do be in touch with me. You can find my email address in the staff directory under Contact Us on our website, and I would love to hear from you. If you are joining us for the live broadcast of this service on Webinar Jam, won't you please say hello in the chat? We love to know that you're here. No matter what platform you're using to join us, you can find helpful resources for participating in the service, such as the order of service, ways to give, and information about our social hour following the service inside the With You worship portal at firstuunash.org. We are so glad to have you worshiping with us.
Good morning. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm delighted to serve as your Director of Music Ministries. Our opening song this morning is Gathered Here, a very popular round in Unitarian Universalist circles. This rendition is sung by the chancel choir of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. I hope you will join in the singing.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, 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 gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Moore Lucas. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a member here at First UU Nashville, and I'm currently serving as one of the co-chairs of the Social Justice Committee and as a worship associate. The words for our call to worship were written by Gary Kowalski. In this quiet hour, may our spirits be renewed. In this gathering of friends, may we be ready to extend ourselves to those in need, and with trust to receive the hand that is offered. In this community of ideals, may we remember the principles that guide us and reflect upon those things that give meaning to our lives, renewing our dedication to serve the highest that we know. In this time of worship, may our minds be open to new truth and our hearts be receptive to love as we give thanks for this life we are blessed to share. The words for our chalice lighting were written by Jean Wallstrom. In this small flame dwell, the beacon light of lanterns guiding travelers home, the warmth of hearth fires tended through the generations, the transforming energy of furnaces, and the power and life of our sun. May these blessings, warmth and light and life-giving energy, be kindled in each of us.
Good morning. This is a story about a young person, much like you, named Jackie, who lived in a town much like the one you live in. It was a very nice town, and like most towns in that part of the world, it had a special tree that was honored by all the people. The tree had been there before the town was built, and everyone knew it would be there long after the town was gone. Over the years, many different writers had written stories about the tree, and those stories were read again and again. The tree provided many good things for the town: food to eat, shade, beautiful colors, places for birds and other animals to rest and hide. People knew that the tree wanted them to be good to each other, and so they were, most of the time. They also knew the tree watched out for them and would keep bad things from happening to them. But sometimes bad things did happen, and the people would explain it by saying, "We didn't water the tree enough," or "The tree had another plan," or "The tree works in mysterious ways." Jackie loved the tree. Just sitting under its shade made them feel safe and calm and loved. Belonging was the word Jackie used to describe that feeling. As Jackie grew older, though, the stories that were written and told and retold just didn't seem to fit with the life experience Jackie had had. A lot of things seemed to happen by chance. Bad things happened to good people, and vice versa. And so Jackie began asking questions, deep questions about the tree, the town, the people in it, and how it all fit together. Some people told Jackie to stop thinking so much about the tree and just feel the goodness of it. Others scolded Jackie and threatened to send them away from the town for doubting everything that had been written and told about the tree. Others clucked their tongues and said, "It's just a phase Jackie is going through." Still others said they understood how Jackie felt. They felt the same way too. And Jackie continued to ask questions. Then one day, while Jackie was sitting under the tree, one of the town elders came by. "Here's my chance," they thought. "The town elders know a lot. Maybe this one can help me figure it all out." And so the two of them, Jackie and the elder, began a long conversation, one that went on for days. The elder asked Jackie what lessons the tree and the things that had been written about it had to give. And Jackie began to think. Well, for sure, to help everyone and to give to others food, shelter, comfort, like it does to us. And to forgive, like when we've climbed it and we accidentally broke a twig or pulled some leaves off. And even when someone carved their initials in the bark, the tree forgave. "Anything else?" the elder asked. "Well, let's see. Everybody does their part to take care of raking leaves, fertilizing or pruning the tree. It's a gathering place for our community and for lots of animals. We can really appreciate the beauty of nature because it's there." "Indeed," said the elder, "and you can do all that even if the stories we tell about the tree aren't true. Lots of people love the tree for the lessons it gives us, not for any magic it might or might not have. And you can too." From then on, Jackie looked at the tree differently. It no longer held magic, but they were grateful for the good that came from it. And Jackie still enjoys sitting in its shade from time to time.
Thank you, Gail, for the story. With gratitude for the shade of trees, both literal and symbolic, that have been part of our lives, and in humility, knowing that much was here before us and will remain long after we're gone, let us join together in this sanctuary we create by the act of gathering for worship, with this meditation written by Samuel Trumbore. Breath meditation. Let us turn inward now. Feel the rhythm of the breath. In and out, in and out. Find the peace of just being with the flow of the breath, letting go of yesterday and tomorrow. Feel the restorative power of the peace of this moment, a peace large enough to open to the concerns and sorrows that trouble us, a stillness quiet enough to respond to the joys and celebrations that enliven us. There is safety here in the rhythm of the breath. The ebb and flow of life is enacted with each one, taking in oxygen, sustenance, letting go of carbon dioxide, waste, taking in the fullness of experience, letting go of the residue that wants to cling to us. Cultivate inner peace and inner safety in this sanctuary. In this sanctuary dedicated to cultivating the spirit of life, dedicated to being a beacon of love for all things. Amen. May it be so. In this season of virtual offering bowls, we are especially grateful for the steady generosity which allows us, both within and beyond our congregation, to continue creating community, nurturing spiritual growth, and acting on our values. You may know that we share every Sunday's collection with an organization whose work outside our walls aligns with our values. Since this is the last Sunday of the month, it is also your last chance to give to our November Share the Plate partner. The Store is an organization providing direct services and building local collaborations to alleviate hunger in Davidson County. You can learn more about their work in our online worship portal. At the moment, we don't have the pleasure of passing physical offering bowls to each other, but our finance folks have made sure that anyone, anytime can access our online donation form at firstuunash.org. As always, your gifts, like your presence among us, are received with gratitude.
Sin Brought Me Back by Betty Bobo Sidon. Sin is what caused me to leave the church and give up religion, and sin is what brought me back. In my grandmother's house, sin was associated with pleasure. All those things that I thought were fun were of the world, and therefore sinful. Dancing, playing cards, going to the movies all condemn me to hell, which made it sound like a pretty interesting place. In my father's house, sin was associated with form and ritual. Eating meat on Friday, coming into church with the head uncovered, those were misdeeds to confess. But I couldn't feel guilty about them. Years later, my 3-year-old son came running to the house to tell me that a neighbor's boy had just told him that God would kill him if he told a lie. I decided that it was time we found a religious community that would sustain and encourage our beliefs, that we are part of a universe of diversity and interdependence, that the diversity of our world suggests that truth and beauty take many forms, that God is concerned with the enhancement of life, that evil is life-destroying, that sin is associated with self-absorption, and that salvation lies in selflessness and service. A religious community is in the world and connected with the world. In her book Pastrix, Lutheran pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber wrote, "I am still not an idealist, not when it comes to our human project. Every human community will disappoint us regardless of how well-intentioned or inclusive. When she was pastor at the church she founded in Denver, at events for new people to the community, she would always explain that the community, no matter how much they loved it, would disappoint them. It's a matter of when, not if. We will let them down, or I'll say something stupid and hurt their feelings. I then invite them on this side of their inevitable disappointment to decide if they'll stick around after it happens. If they choose to leave when we don't meet their expectations, they won't get to see how grace can come in and fill the holes left by our community's failure. And that's just too beautiful and too real to miss." I know I have the easy version of the story of leaving my childhood faith. I know this. I have friends who have faced abuse at the hands of clergy or caregivers who justified their abuse by theology. I have friends who were serving as clergy when they were forced out of their traditions and their jobs because their beliefs grew and their congregations didn't grow with them. And so they lost their livelihoods and their communities while they were already questioning what they had believed all their lives. I know folks who have granted their communities and theologies grace time and time again, who tried really hard to stay. People who did things like conversion therapy, stayed in bad marriages to be good enough to belong. So I know I have the gentle, kind version of leaving my childhood faith. Because all that was uncomfortable for me is I was an artsy kid with ADHD, and I happened to be the daughter of the family black sheep. So I never quite fit in at my childhood church, where good behavior and compliance were prized. If there was something I heard over and over again growing up at church, it was, "Why can't you be more like your cousin?" My cousin is 4 years older than me. She's neurotypical, and her family was more traditional than mine. I was raised in a church that church nerds would describe as a family-sized church. That is, a church with an average Sunday attendance of 75 or fewer people. In my case, that descriptor is particularly apt. At any given time in my childhood and youth, at least one relative of mine was serving on a church session, the Presbyterian version of a board. Someone else related to me was almost always on the board of deacons, the lay people who provided lay pastoral care. My mom had been confirmed at that church and married at that church. Her funeral was held at that church. I would ultimately be confirmed at that church, and I was married there too. The first adult choir I ever sang in was at that church. And even though I never really fit in, I was always loved and cared for there. The people there taught me to love Jesus and to love and serve others. They told me stories of a God who loved their people more than anything, and told me that we were God's chosen people, and I believed them. I left that church not because I stopped believing altogether, but because of something I like to call middle school lunchroom theology. Forgive my digression, but this will connect. When I was in the 6th grade, 2 of the girls in my group of friends got into a fight, and by the end of it, our group of friends split as well. I don't remember what that fight was about. just that we split up because Amy and Jenny, the girls who were fighting, basically declared that you could not be friends with both of them. You had to pick. Although I wasn't involved in the argument, and neither girl was mad at me, if I was friends with one of them, I could not be friends with the other. Ever obstinate, I refused to choose. So I spent a lot of lonely lunches until the whole thing calmed down a little bit. And while I still had friends who were on opposite sides of the Amy-Jenny divide, I could move between the groups as long as I didn't make a big deal about it. Since the stupid fight wasn't a big deal to me, not making a big deal about having friends on both sides wasn't a deal breaker for me. When I was 15, I transferred from my ordinary suburban high school, where I never quite fit in, this is a theme in my life, to a quirky arts boarding school with a student body of slightly over 400 people. What I learned is that the kids who wind up at a school like that are either extremely talented in their arts area or were pieces that didn't fit in their old puzzles, sometimes both. So at that time, in the mid-1990s, there were a lot of LGBTQ kids at that school, and that's basically how I, the result of a fairly sheltered upbringing, discovered that LGBTQ people were real people, teenagers like me, not just abstractions or guests on Oprah. And so ultimately, these same kind, loving people at church who told me that Jesus loved me, and God loved all their people, told me God didn't love my LGBTQ friends, and that ultimately, if I kept loving my friends for being who they were made to be, Jesus would stop loving me. Basically, I could be friends with my friends, or I could be friends with Jesus, but the people who had always told me that Jesus would always be my friend were telling me I couldn't be friends with both. I was right back in that middle school lunchroom, being asked to choose. Except in this case, it really mattered to me. It was between the friends who were making my experience at school colorful and fun and livable, and my faith. In the end, I chose my friends. And between my sophomore year of high school and when I washed up at First UU, I really only ever showed up at churches for gigs, weddings, and when my parents expected me to. I tried to keep a hold of both my faith and my friends, but on that side of that particular disappointment, the place where I saw the most grace and holiness was in the community of my friends and our shared wild joy of being young in a place where we were allowed to be more fully ourselves. That through the arts was even giving us the tools to better tell our own stories. And because I was only home for about a quarter of the year, it was really easy to slip away. I didn't have to make a radical declaration. I could just stop going to church, especially when I was at school. And I could find my own paths to transcendence and holiness. I got married at that church because it was important to my mom. I had a large reception because it was important to my dad. Neither of those things were terribly important to me, so I didn't make a thing of it. I still loved the people at my childhood church. I still have fond memories of them. And I'm still connected with my family, but I couldn't connect with that church or that faith tradition the way I had as a youth. And when I decided to stay in Nashville after college, it was easy just to not go to church until it wasn't. The year I turned 26, I realized I was really, really lonely. Most of my friends from college had moved away, and although I was fairly newly married, I needed more. I needed people. As something of an introvert, I was at a loss of how to make friends. For most of my life, my strategy for making friends has been to be kind of funny, near extroverts, and somehow be included in their group, which works really well when you're in school. It's really hard to pull off as an adult. Since I was in graduate school at the time, and I was trying to write a thesis, I couldn't make friends at school. I spent most of my time in the library. Being audibly funny there is frowned upon. At my job, I was the youngest person in my department by about 20 years. And so making lasting connections in a job that I had no intention of making a career was difficult at best. And so I figured I might try to find a church. And after trying worship at a few churches that didn't fit me, they were too tight or too loose, like sweaters that just didn't work, I showed up at First Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashville, mostly thanks to an internet quiz that declared that I was 98% UU, 90% mainline Protestant, and something like 85% Mormon. Yeah, I don't get that one either. And I stuck around. Within a few months, I had become a member. I had been hooked into being part of the musical events of the church. I joined the choir, I served on committees, and 16 years later, I'm still here. And in UU theology, I found an alternative to that lunchroom theology where I could only be right with God if I was friends with the right people who behaved the right way. I found a belief system that prized relationship and suggested joy was holy. It was a space in which I could explore and celebrate my pantheistic leanings while also still loving the Jesus I learned to love in Sunday school. It was a faith that celebrated my LGBTQ friends, which in 2003 was only slightly less rare than it had been in 1994. As is, I think, pretty typical of folks who leave their childhood faith and land somewhere different, my mother disapproved of my newfound Unitarian Universalism. Less so than if I had become Catholic or Cumberland Presbyterian or a militant atheist. But I think she would have been happier if, like her, I could have continued to fit the faith of my childhood. And maybe it would have continued to fit if I'd stayed in the same geographic place like she had. Maybe there's a universe in the multiverse where I'm a very happy Presbyterian who never left Macomb County, Michigan. My mom died about a year after I had joined this church, so she never had a chance to see the ways this community has cared for me and my family. I can't help but think her heart would have changed maybe just a little if she had. When she died, that church where I'd grown up cared for me and even incorporated our chalice extinguishing in her memorial service. But when I got back to Nashville, still grieving, it was this community that helped me put my broken pieces back together. It isn't that Unitarian Universalism or this congregation has never disappointed me, for sure. Some of it is that as an adult, I'm better able to weather disappointment than I was at the age of 15, so I've been able to stick around. But some of it is that I've found a community that has never once asked me to choose between loving the people in my life and staying in community. And it is here that I have found the space where I can experience disappointment and see the beauty of the healing that happens after. I've been a UU longer at this point in my life than I was a Presbyterian, and my belief and my practices are very firmly UU. Nonetheless, I can name tendencies in my own religious life at the age of 42 that are still tied to my childhood and youth as a Presbyterian. I care so much about governance and process. And I think that is in no small part because I came from a tradition that was so proud of its governance structure they named themselves after it. I learned about Robert's Rules of Order in my confirmation classes, and I still care about procedure. I'm still the guy who's going to call for quorum if it looks like the crowd has thinned too much. I still sing melody on the first and final verses of hymns and sing harmony on the middle verses, because that's what I learned singing in the choir at my childhood church. I think it was an act of bravery when I tried new churches, and when I came here because an online survey told me to. I think committing to a new community was a brave step. And I see this in my friends who have left their faith traditions all the time. Many of them find new church homes to fill their hunger for community and spiritual practice. Many who don't find new homes find or build community in other contexts. One of my favorite podcasts was started by friends who had a failed pro-LGBTQ evangelical church plant. And so they started a podcast to work through their own grief with their religious tradition. They've built up a community of their listeners that has grown into a community of care. And that was the sort of community they were trying to build as pastors with their church. And what they have built instead reaches so much farther than their local community. And while none of them are religious professionals anymore, they still, through their podcasts, through the events we've had, pastor to a community of mutual concern, and that is holy work. I would argue that although my friends aren't in professional ministry anymore, they are authentically living into their callings of care for others. And although almost every story I know about leaving one's childhood faith centers around a single event or a single issue, there are almost always other clues that say that there was more than that one single thing that made the fit not work. In my story, the big event was my LGBTQ friends. But really the clues that I was never going to be able to come back from that was my difficulty behaving properly. My trouble keeping difficult truths to myself. My dad has a story about leaving his childhood faith that involves nearly getting run down in the parking lot, and the priest telling him it wasn't a big deal because the guy who nearly ran my dad down was a big donor. But his story is full of other signposts that he was never going to fit in as a good Roman Catholic. And in the end, I think making this sort of shift, leaving one's childhood faith and finding something new, is almost always about recognizing the good and the bad of both traditions and intentionally placing your feet on a new path. Sometimes it's looking at the old tradition and throwing the whole thing out. It has caused too much pain and too much difficulty, and it is impossible to stay. And sometimes the whole thing needs to go to protect an individual's mental or physical health. For me, it was a more subtle process of deciding which things should go and which things should stay. So for me, I was able to keep caring about procedure, about process, about how things are done and how things are governed. But I was able to discard valuing good behavior over real feeling, and I am always grateful for that.
It was in the later years of her life that my mother asked me when it was that I quit believing. I suspect it was a question that she had long wanted to ask the daughter she had raised in the Lutheran Church, the daughter who had become a Unitarian Universalist minister. So when she asked when it was that I quit believing, I responded, "Mom, it's not that I quit believing, it's that I never believed in the first place." "You mean you never believed in God?" she asked. To which I responded, "Not in the way Lutherans believe." She looked puzzled. Having grown up in a Norwegian-American household as she had, her religion and her family heritage were one and the same. For her, faith and belief were one and the same. As I was thinking about what I would say next, her face softened and she nodded, a knowing kind of nod. In that moment, I decided nothing more need be said. What was most important to me in that moment was that nearing the end of her life as she was, what was most important to me was that she be at peace. The look on her face told me more than words ever could. What I would have said next, had she asked, is this: doubt is what caused me to leave the church, and doubt is what brought me back. For Betty Bobo Seiden, whose words we heard just a few minutes ago, it was sin that caused her to leave the church and sin that brought her back. A fun fact about Betty Seiden: she's a member of the First Unitarian Church in Oakland, California, and she is the oldest ranger in the National Park Service at the age of 98. In her long tenure as a Unitarian Universalist, she has served on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee and on the boards of our 2 UU-identified seminaries, Starr King School for the Ministry and Meadville Lombard Theological School. From her short essay titled, "Sin Brought Me Back," it is clear that her service to our association of congregations is grounded in her faith journey as a Unitarian Universalist. For Unitarian Universalists, our faith is always an examined faith. Or as theologian James Luther Adams was fond of saying, an unexamined faith isn't worth having. The dictionary gives several definitions of faith, one of which is belief in the traditional doctrines of religion. Letting go of faith, letting go of the traditional doctrines of one's religion, the one born into or married into, or one chosen at a former stage of life. Letting go of faith in this way is often what brings people through the doors of Unitarian Universalist churches. Here we make space for doubts and questions. Here we provide tools and companions for a lifelong journey of faith, one that is less about beliefs than it is about commitments. Find that to which you are deeply committed, and you will have found your faith. Letting go of a faith tradition you once embraced, or one that once embraced you, is no small thing. It isn't as easy as taking off an old pair of shoes and stepping into new ones. It isn't only about faith and belief. It's also about rituals, traditions, and relationships. Leaving the fold can mean being misunderstood or rejected or even shunned, depending on the faith tradition being left behind. Over my years in ministry, there have always been some who left Eucharistic traditions, where communion was the centerpiece of the Sunday service, and find that though their beliefs don't align with the theology, they miss the ritual of communion. And there have always been some who left because their faith community caused them harm. And seemingly simple things, like religious-sounding language or traditional rituals, can touch deep and painful wounds. What I often tell people is that my favorite part of being a Unitarian Universalist is that people can change their beliefs and not lose their community. Much as we make a space for doubts and questions, we make a space for healing. When I first found Unitarian Universalism, I think it was 6 months before I could make it through a whole service without crying. And people who know me well will tell you that I'm not a person who cries easily. What was spoken from the pulpit by ministers and lay people was sometimes inspiring, sometimes challenging, sometimes thought-provoking, but always liberating. The tunes of the old familiar hymns, recast with UU-friendly lyrics, helped me to reclaim what was good from my religious past. For me, it is the ever-abiding presence of grace in our lives, those gifts of life that come to us unearned and undeserved. The air we breathe, the earth beneath our feet, the rain and the soil that give us food, the gift of life itself. That moment I shared with my mother when she asked when I quit believing was a moment of grace. There was a time in our relationship when that question would have led to an argument, each of us defending our position, needing to be right. Instead, on that day and in that moment, we granted each other the grace of acceptance. Ultimately, letting go of faith is not the end of faith, but a new beginning. It is the freedom to question and to doubt, and in the doing, to discover that to which you are most deeply committed, and then to keep faith with those commitments. May it be so. May we make it so. Amen, and blessed be.
Our closing song is a modern setting of the Welsh tune Hyrfrydol, which means cheerful. It was written by Roland Pritchard in 1844 and is sung to many sets of lyrics, including Come Thou Long Expected Jesus, Earth Was Given as a Garden, and of course, in our hymnal, Peter Mayer's Blue Boat Home. Won't you join First UU's choir in singing?
The words to our chalice extinguishing were written by Elizabeth Sell Jones, and they can be found at the bottom of our order of service. Please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I leave you today with words written by Norman Naylor, reminded that we are part and participants of the universe. Let us go forth from the quiet of this hour, encouraged to strive toward faithfulness to the best in ourselves, in others, and in the whole of creation. This service has ended. May our service continue renewed. Go in peace. Go in love.